say thank you to Gene for the gift. You sent this a few weeks ago. Thank you. I will clear it today. Things are pretty tight. But I wanted to say thank you. I don't have a chat open yet. Had a difficult time actually getting the Twitch stream going. Wanted to say thank you to Christy, who's usually in the chat. She probably is right now. She's very generous. Thank you for being one of the generous supporters. And you're actually among the most generous in the world because, anyways, it's because it's relative, right? I also wanted to, I got a couple of gifts on Mark Kulak, by the way. MK Ultra, if you prefer. Houstonic.live. It is Wednesday, July 23rd, 2025. I had also received a couple of gifts on PayPal. I wanted to say thank you for that. I should have like a big scrolling thank you screen. Yes, I want to thank a Suzanne, last name F. Thank you for the gift, Suzanne. That was very thoughtful of you. Thank you so much. I wanted to say thank you to T. I just call this person T. Some people are nervous about their identity, so for some people, I'm a little bit more. Oh, I see my Patreon went up this month. I need to go through that as well. For those who support me on Patreon, thank you so much. I don't post anything there. What you see is what you get. And I think Jonathan Cooey did a good job, Gigo and Biological, he captured it well, and I'm on the same page with him. My goal was never to create a big business model and put a lot of content out there behind paywalls. I believed, and I still believe, that this has been my business proposal from day one, was whatever is gathered, whatever is analyzed and assessed, organized, whoever volunteers to support the program, what do you get? You get to know that you're supporting my efforts to put this stuff online and make it available for anyone else who wishes to use it. I don't have a lot of Substack content, and most of what you'll find on my archive, HoustonicITS.com or Houstonic.org, is as free of my own narrative as possible. But if you go to HoustonicITS.com or to Houstonic.live, you'll see up above there's all of these letters, and then it's an alphabetized, U.S. English alphabetized list of pages. They're sort of Wikipedia pages, but they're really just more like content and evidence pages, okay? If there is a Wikipedia page of the same topic, in each of these pages I will include a link to the live Wikipedia page, as well as an inline a snapshot of whatever that Wikipedia content was on the day I made those pages. So for example, let's go to who would be a interesting person here. Okay, Casey Means, woman who recently was nominated, I don't even know if she got the role, for the United States Surgeon General, Paula Casey Means. So if I click on her page, the page that I have, here's the link to the current Wikipedia page, and in line I just snapshotted the content out of the Wikipedia page in here. Now that may not sound like much, and to be honest, it isn't. That part is not really the most interesting. I do find Wikipedia to be very valuable, but like every other asset out there, you need to know how to use it. But then afterwards, and the Casey Means page is not really the best one because we haven't dived on that subject a lot. But for example, Dr. Judy Mikovits page, if you scroll down, it's just an extensive list of articles, references, videos, interviews, resumes, mentions in other publications from the U.S. government, National Cancer Institute, associations that she was part of, etc., etc., etc. It is narrative free. It is evidence, and it is organized by perhaps one of the most important part of every I would say probably the most important piece of metadata of every piece of evidence is when was it made? When was that evidence made? When was this article written that we have here? An article which is a snapshot of the RSIME. That's something about myalgic encephalomyelitis or chronic fatigue page, and an article about Judy Mikovits on that page. When was that written? So, and I just include this content in there. A lot of this content has thus, after I've captured it, disappeared. It's no longer out there. In some cases, it's no longer even on the Internet Archive, archive.org. I have a lot of content on here that is admittedly behind firewalls, or I should say paywalls. New York Times, Wall Street Journals, etc. As I've collected it, I put it out there. If someone wants to sue me, they're going to have a hard time proving that they've actually lost much revenue. But I put the evidence out there, and then people can read it. And it's just the evidence. But anyways, there is 1,100 or 1,200 pages that I've made so far. Some of the pages are longer than others. It's all alphabetized. And it's backed up by about 40 to 50,000 assets, individual assets. And this is just the content I have for this research archive. And I constantly refer to this during my videos. Because it is narrative free, or I should say free of my narrative. If I'm capturing evidence from the New York Times, the New York Times is going to have an opinion buried within there, of course. But it's free of my narrative. And the support that goes to my channel maintains these subscriptions, maintains these digital assets, maintains this website, maintains the backup services, the computers around me, etc. And my hope is that this content will be used and will influence more channels and other researchers. What I didn't expect when I started doing this is how long that was going to take, because I was under I was misled. I thought that most of what I saw on the internet, as far as internet, what I thought were independent researchers and so on, were actually independent people. I knew that, probably some were controlled somehow or had payments coming from some agency. I never expected such a high percentage of them to effectively be in there. Now, there are others who are not, but they're actually hard to find because they're never promoted. They're probably as hard to find as it is for them to find me. But anyways, this is where it goes to. It's a massive archive. It's one of the largest independent archives out there, independently maintained. And it's taken, I don't know how many thousands of hours to put together. Look, it doesn't matter. If I said it was 20,000 or 50,000 or a billion hours, it doesn't. Should that make it any better or less better? That's just me complaining. It took a lot of hours, okay? And I think that most of you would appreciate it. And this is where it goes. And if it's possible for me to actually, it didn't happen last year, but get enough support to actually exceed the costs, then I might even have an income. Last year, there was no income. But that's okay. Probably my top sponsor fade away last year because they had sort of a conditional support, which I was not aware of. And the conditional support was they don't like China. Okay. Fine, people can love or hate whoever they want. I don't care. I live in the United States, and I just want the United States to, be okay and look out for itself, and hopefully other countries look out for themselves, and then, we find this nice little happy medium ground. But I'm not here to take offensive positions against other countries. Even if another country, as an American, if another country was doing something nefarious to the United States, and there were people within the United States making it possible, I'm not going to be mad at the other country. I'm going to be upset that there are people within my own country that are selling it out first. I can't blame other countries for taking advantage of weakness and sellouts and traders within the United States. Why should I be mad at them? I should be mad at the people within my own country. So I don't have this anti this country or that viewpoint. But whatever the case, that's fine. I suspected that maybe there were some strings, but eventually it became clear, and adios, and it is what it is. Review. Yeah, so the title for tonight's show is Suzanne Humphries, and I got the Suzanne Humphries book in. This is a 2013 printing of this book, Dissolving Illusions. Disease, Vaccines, and the Forgotten History. Suzanne Humphries, and the co-author is Roman Bistranik, I guess. Sorry for mispronouncing your name. This book has been recently republished. I am not aware of there being differences between the 2013 printing and the new one. There may be very few or any differences or meaningful or important differences. Okay. I, of course, though, err on the side of wanting the original printing, not because I want to catch people making mistakes. I expect there to be mistakes. No matter how hard someone tries, there's going to be something wrong, right? That's not the big deal. I wanted to see, but what I'm actually looking for is how the narrative may change, because I suspect that Suzanne Humphries has a role in narrative curation, as far as someone who is, at the very least, skeptical of the medical establishment, food safety, and medical interventions, immunizations, and vaccines. Okay. Now, she was recently, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, on the Joe Rogan show, and I reviewed a couple of clips of her appearance on Joe Rogan, and it was enough to make me want to actually, because she pimped her book, for me to actually get a copy of her book. And I wanted the original book, the first printing of the book, and that is what I have here. It only came today, so I haven't really read much of it. I always start off by going to the index, and I wanted to see what was in the index. Now, sometimes people will mention somebody or a topic and forget to index it. Happens a lot, especially when you have hundreds of doctors and different diseases. So the fact that the book does not mention a Dr. Hillary KOPROWSKI suggests that perhaps Hillary KOPROWSKI is simply not covered in this book. And that's possible. But given the fact that polio vaccines are such a big concern, and there's really 3 people to talk about with respect to polio vaccines: Dr. Jonas Salk, Dr. Hillary KOPROWSKI, and Dr. Albert Sabin, Sabin. Some people say Sabin. I'm going to go with Sabin. You say tomato, I say tomato. And Hillary KOPROWSKI is not mentioned in here. Now, the Hillary KOPROWSKI's vaccine was an oral vaccine, and it was, to the best of my knowledge, the first polio vaccine that was ever used on a person. And there's an interesting story behind this, okay? Very interesting story. I'm just doing this off the top of my head, so I don't know the best way to be able to present this evidence, what the best order of presenting this evidence is. And again, thank you for those people who sent their prayers for my father. He's in rough shape. I will be tomorrow spending time with him. It's a tough situation. So I'm not 100% right now. Just bear in mind there. But I think this actually is, believe it or not, I'm actually doing this show as much for me as I am for you, because it can be therapeutic. Okay, so KOPROWSKI's not mentioned in here. And KOPROWSKI was the first person to have a polio vaccine used on people. KOPROWSKI's vaccine was an oral vaccine. And it was an oral, swallowed it, right? Polio vaccine. Albert Sabin's vaccine was also a polio vaccine. And Jonas Salk, he was working, or he was given. We'll get more details on that as we research and learn more. He was assigned, the intramuscularly injected polio vaccine. And these vaccines are being pursued and being sort of rolled out in the early 1950s. The year of the big Salk polio vaccine rollout was between 1954 and 1956. Hilary KOPROWSKI had a vaccine. His oral polio vaccine was tested before the other two. Now, oral vaccines were, I can't say it was the only vaccine that was ever suggested to be an oral vaccine up until that point. But most vaccines up until that point were not oral vaccines. They were not. They were given with scarification on the skin like the smallpox vaccine. Or they were injected intramuscularly. Those are the two ways of administration. It is noteworthy for those who haven't watched these episodes, and I do almost an episode a day, sometimes more, so it's totally cool if you missed it, that mentions the frequency of mentioning infant paralysis, child paralysis, infantile paralysis in U.S. newspapers was almost zero. There was almost no references to that phrase at all before the year 1880-something, 1885. And then slowly it started to tick up, and then it sort of reached a peak around 1916, and then it started to go back down again. Now, infantile paralysis or infant paralysis or child paralysis are all oftentimes associated with, correlated with, or it's just another word for polio or being stricken with the poliomyelitis virus. But earlier on, it would be typically called paralysis. And what's noteworthy is that those dates, the frequency of child paralysis, infantile paralysis, starting from near zero and then slowly going up, perfectly correlates with the increased use of intramuscular injection. Perfectly. It's 100% correlation. That doesn't mean causation, but it's near 100% correlation. Before the 1890s, there was almost no vaccine that was ever, or even medicine, aside from maybe saline or salt water or morphine, which was injected into a muscle of any human using a hypodermic needle, hypodermic syringe. It just didn't happen. The idea of using a hypodermic syringe to inject medicine, or in particular vaccines, started with animals around the year 1880. The justification for injecting vaccines or antitoxins using a hypodermic syringe was very weak. It was a very, very weak research that they did to do that. And it seemed to have, it became popular because they could do it at scale and quickly with farm animals, with agriculture. And the doctors at that time that were working with animals on farms were typically also doctors that would work with people. That hard separation didn't really exist in 1880, 1890. So as Jonathan Cooey, Ph.D., Giggle and Biological, said today on his program, he said it multiple times before, intramuscular injection is a bad idea from the late 1880s. It's true. It was a bad idea. Something that I believe the small group of people that I associate myself with, we do right, and I encourage other people to follow and model, is we don't immediately assume bad intentions every time something terrible is done. The most likely explanation for why intramuscular injection started with people for vaccines was simply because it was a bad idea. It was just a bad idea based upon a very poor, almost non-existent understanding of what was going to happen. And, you know, the evidence, which was loosely collected and assessed, didn't make it clear that it was going to be problematic at that time. It was just a bad idea. It was a bad idea that got traction, and then people repeat what they see their mentors do. Here's a great example, okay? In North America, much of our United States, much of Canada, I don't know about Mexico. Mexico might have some differences in this. Many of our homes, and even many of our small businesses as well, are built using houses with wood construction, wood timber construction. Why is that? It's because when people first settled North America, mostly from Europe, they had building techniques involving, old growth timbers, concrete, masonry, and so on. But most of the heavier elements, which they typically would use in Europe, they just weren't available here. But America was loaded with lumber. It's never been milled before. So we had all of these old growth trees everywhere. So the practice of building houses with lumber in the Americas started as a consequence of the resources that were available then. As people are born in the Americas, they learn carpentry techniques and home construction techniques by their fathers. Sorry, being a bit, I'm assuming gender there, but the majority of carpenters are men. And then they hone their techniques. Their children, or the people who they mentor, in turn also use lumber, and so on. Now, over the years, with modern building techniques and modern materials and how well we've studied these things, we've gotten pretty good at it. But the main reason why we use wood construction in North America is because, well, that's how we learned to build houses. Maybe it's not the best idea. And you see constantly, like I follow a lot of building trade shows on YouTube. There's always another channel. We're going to do we're going to have this big arm, and it's going to automatically pour concrete and build a house. It's going to print the house. And then there's the stackable concrete blocks. And then there's this method over here. And yeah, they may all be great, but none of them have the momentum. Similar to the English language. I'm not capable of assessing how great English is to every other spoken or written language. I don't know. It almost doesn't matter. It's more than good enough, and it's become a standard. I don't fight over it because it's a standard. Maybe another language is more optimal. Is it really worth having to rewrite everything on the planet and retrain everyone to learn another language? I'm not being pig-headed saying we should all speak English because I think I'm better. It's the language that has the most momentum, and it is what it is, right? So the idea of using intramuscular injection for the administration of vaccines it started off as, well, we could do it this way. And it was fast. They did it with animals, and they started doing it with people. And for the most part, they saw overall improvements in the health of the population because the quality of sanitation and so on was improving. Some of that might have also been due to the fact that there's some evidence that there can be times when the smallpox vaccine itself, it's administered completely differently, has its own benefits. Now, it also has potentially some drawbacks as well. But it's hard to assess the drawbacks fairly because there was, in the 1800s, absolutely zero standardization. There's doctors making their own smallpox vaccines. They're coming from all over the place. They're made with different, sometimes with different recipes, different manufacturers. There's who knows what the quality control is, the storage. Nobody knows. So it's sort of, how do you determine, how can anyone ever make a statement that this one type of vaccine back then, when there's no standards at all, was good or bad? It's hard to say. But anyways, the idea of intramuscular injection started as probably just a bad idea. And then people couldn't believe it didn't work. So, that led to more tweaking. That led to, and then maybe they saw some better results, and then they used it more. And one bad idea perhaps led to more bad ideas. Eventually, I suspect, as Jonathan Cooey suspects, and it's really Jonathan Cooey's idea, PhD, not JJ, that at some point, some scientists definitely started to realize that the act of injecting stuff into a muscle in and of itself, whether you call it a vaccine or not, was a problem. Doesn't matter if just because you call it a vaccine, that doesn't make it any different than just grabbing a fistful of chicken soup or garden soil and injecting it into the muscle. Injecting a complex collection of biological material into a muscle is a completely unnatural act. It violates the way the immune system works. It is unlike any other injury that we could possibly or would ever typically encounter in nature, even if we get into a fight and have cuts and so on. It's just to have a bunch of stuff squeezed into a muscle. It's just odd. That's just not how it works. So here we are. So as hypodermic syringes, as intramuscular injection is being used for the application of antitoxins, as well as vaccines, starting around 1885, 1890, and increasing throughout the United States. There is, in coordination with that, a year-by-year increase in the frequency of childhood paralysis. It appears as though the act of injecting biological material into a muscle, perhaps it's causing an autoimmune disorder, where the body is starting to actually fight against its own muscles, its own nerves. It's not really clear what the chain of events is, but the paralysis, the lack of control or the lack of coordination, is going in concert with that in some cases. And it also, by the way, it doesn't happen immediately. No one got an injection and then immediately went paralyzed. It would happen over a few hours or a few days. It took a while for the autoimmune reaction to totally kick in and to start causing more and more problems. And for some people, they had no problems whatsoever. And it was probably a bigger issue with children because they're still developing, but also likely there was not dosing. They probably gave the same dose to people as they did children. Sometimes I wouldn't be surprised if there's some places that gave children even more, thinking that more is better, right? More antibacterial ointment would definitely be better than just a little. Maybe they thought about vaccines the same way. So, as Suzanne Humphries is now on the Joe Rogan show, she's talking about all kinds of problems. After Joe Rogan asks about, what do you think about vaccines and vaccine safety and vaccine efficacy, and then she goes off on a long 10 or 20 minutes and doesn't really give any answer at all. But the one thing she doesn't say, though, is maybe it's just intramuscular injection. It's just every other excuse in the book there. And there's even suggestions. She even suggested that polio itself is a real virus. In other words, it's caused only by a virus that came out of the Rockefeller laboratory because they were trying to weaponize polio virus in the early 1900s or something nonsense like that. But now that I have the book, I can go to a particular page here, and I think it's around, again, this is the 2013 printing. No mention of Hillary KOPROWSKI, which is a shocking omission. All right. So page 230, the bottom of page 230 says, I don't know what chapter, this is a chapter called The Disappearance of Polio. This small section is called What Polio Was and Where It Is Now. Before the vaccine was in widespread use, many distinct diseases were natively grouped under the umbrella of polio. Only after the vaccine was widely accepted, and the vaccine again, the rollout, mid-1950s. Only after the vaccine was widely accepted was there an effort to distinguish poliovirus from other types of paralytic disease. And that's interesting. So there was no technical capability. First of all, obviously they couldn't see it. There was no electron microscope, so they couldn't see it, and they certainly couldn't in any ways describe it on a molecular level. They just assumed it was polio. But here it goes on to say, only after the vaccine was widely accepted was there an effort to distinguish poliovirus from other types of paralytic disease. The following list represents a few that could have been categorized and documented as polio prior to 1958. So she gives a list here of things, diseases and other things, which could have been causal of polio, of infantile paralysis prior to 1958. And of course, adults were subject to this as well. The list, it's several bullets. The list, number one on the list, enteroviruses, such as coxsackie and echo. I'm not suggesting that this is an ordered list. It's just a bulleted list. The second bullet says undiagnosed congenital syphilis. Syphilis is the same family of bacterium as Borrelia burgdorferi. I think I'm pronouncing that right, which is also known as Lyme disease or Lyme. Number 3, arsenic and DDT toxicity. DDT is that it's an antifungal or it's an insecticide. I forget how it's used in agriculture. The fourth bullet is transverse myelitis. Fifth bullet is Guillain-Barré syndrome. I'm skipping the next bullet because it's the biggie. But the last two are hand, foot, and mouth disease, then lead poisoning. And the one that I missed was this: provocation of limb paralysis by intramuscular injections of many types, including a variety of vaccines. I'll read it again because neither Jonathan Cooey nor myself could have possibly worded it any better. And this is Suzanne Humphries in 2013. Provocation of limb paralysis by intramuscular injections of many types, including a variety of vaccines. Now that's beautiful because, as I said earlier, injecting a biological material into a muscle is a bad idea. Period. It doesn't matter if it's soup. It doesn't matter if it's dirt. It doesn't matter if you call it a vaccine. Now, maybe saline salt water, maybe morphine, if there needs to be localized pain relief, maybe. But that's it. That's it. By the way, these are simple. These are very simple things. These are not complex proteins. These are simple, simple solutions. Now, of course, morphine leads to addiction, but let's not get into that just yet. So anything, injections of many types, including a variety of vaccines. Yes, there you go. It doesn't include smallpox because smallpox is administered using scarification. It's administered on the skin. You cut the skin and you rub in your ivory points with the smallpox virus on it, allegedly. So she says it. Susan Humphries says it perfectly. Matter of fact, she says it so well that I think we should actually use these words: provocation of limb paralysis by intramuscular injections of many types, including a variety of vaccines. She knows it's intramuscular injection. I can almost guarantee she has had conversations where she has looked at the data, and it's clear. Paralysis went up as intramuscular injections became more common. It's that simple. And this led to polio. And the cure for polio is allegedly a polio vaccine. Now, is a polio vaccine really a vaccine that's being given to protect people against a polio virus? Or is a polio vaccine simply a vehicle for testing a new way of administering biological material, called whatever you want, you can call it a vaccine, that would not cause paralysis? Because if they had a vaccine which simply didn't do anything, Does that cure polio? Does that cause polio to go away? Well, it doesn't if other intramuscular injections then cause polio. So you see, what they needed was a new platform. They needed a new platform that they could be sure, if repeated, for other types of viruses, would not cause the paralysis seen with vaccines up until that point. They couldn't figure it out. Now, it's not clear to me yet exactly how sophisticated their understanding of this was. But the omission of Hillary KOPROWSKI is, I think, a big deal. And I'll show you why here. Let's go back up to the index here and let's go to the Ks. Now, I don't have exhaustive research archive pages for every subject. I collect things as I need them. Some of these are drearily empty. Some of them are incredibly long and will take almost 100 pages to print out. And they get filled as I need them and as my research focuses on different things. So Hillary KOPROWSKI, K-O-P, 1916. It's noteworthy that Hillary KOPROWSKI, who lived to be a good old age, he lived well into his 90s. Hillary KOPROWSKI was born in Poland, allegedly, and he escaped the Nazis. His family initially moved to Italy, and it's a weird story where they were, the Catholic Church was involved somehow. He actually was a piano teacher near the Vatican for a few months during World War II. And then his family, his wife, and I think I don't know if he had his 2 kids by then or not. He was still pretty young in World War II. Old enough to have kids, though. Was relocated to Brazil. So they went to Brazil, and after he went to Brazil, now it's 1942, 1943, he almost immediately got a job at the Rockefeller Institute in Brazil. That luck is too hard to just believe. So I suspect that he went to Brazil and it was arranged that he would have a job at the Rockefeller Institute. Why is that interesting? Because the Rockefeller Institute in Brazil is in very close communication with the Rockefeller Institute in New York City in the 1940s. The Rockefeller Institute in the 1940s, going into World War II, was the place where they were doing the manufacturing of the yellow fever vaccine for the U.S. military. And the yellow fever vaccine for the U.S. military was a catastrophe for World War II. Largest documented hepatitis outbreak, liver diseases I've heard ever, but I don't know how that is qualified. But let's just say it was really big and remarkable, and actually was almost crippling for the U.S. military. So they very quickly stopped that and had to reformulate it. So KOPROWSKI winds up working on yellow fever vaccines in Brazil in connection with the yellow fever vaccine work, which is happening in New York City. And I suspect that somehow or another, I don't know how it worked, I don't know how we wound up there, but KOPROWSKI is serving as some sort of conduit between something that's going on at the Vatican during World War II. I don't know what that is. It could have simply been collusion with Italy. Worst case scenario is that medical experimentation that was happening in Germany was actually being used actively by the United States before the war was even over. After all, the Catholic Church did not only help relocate Joseph Mengele to Brazil, as, by the way, Brett Weinstein recently talked about, but the Catholic Church also, the Vatican also, provided safe storage for all of the research notes of Joseph Mengele for nearly 50, 60, 70 years, and only recently released most of them on the second or third week of the COVID-19 pandemic, as if they needed to hold them off until then. I know it's conspiratorial, but I think it's very possible that there was actually collusion between research that was happening in those camps and medical research which was needed by the United States and maybe even the U.S. military. And I think KOPROWSKI, maybe he might not have signed up for something of that to be as that diabolical. There were a couple of other scientists involved, to be fair. And look, if I was a Jew in Poland and I see the Germans coming, and if I could go to, if the church is going to help me out, the Catholic Church, and I can go to Brazil and eventually get relocated to the United States, and maybe even be guaranteed a better future, even a jump start, because I'm going to be taking this research, which is happening one way or the other, and sending it up to New York City, well, I probably would have done that too. And I bet a lot of people would have. This is a person who's simply understanding the circumstances and going with it. And there's nothing he could have ever done, even if he thought it was repulsive, to stop it. So I encourage not to interpret his role, if that is what happened, as him being, bad, criminal, etc. The world is awful, and a lot of people get dealt awful cards. And what are you going to do with it? But that said, I think that there could be a real nightmare behind the story which Hillary KOPROWSKI was involved in. Okay, so KOPROWSKI comes to the United States in 1944, 1945, and he goes on to become the first person to not only develop a polio vaccine, but actually have it tested on humans. Now, it was an oral polio vaccine. That is sort of different than what everyone else is looking. Everyone else is looking at an intramuscular vaccine, intramuscular injection vaccine. An oral polio vaccine doesn't solve the problem of why were these other intramuscular injection vaccines causing paralysis. So it's a little bit of a cheat when you think about it, right? You could see how people would get like, oh man, you solved the problem, but you didn't really solve the real problem. He's a very disliked person because the people that were used for that experimentation were, I think, children who had mental disabilities who were living in a home in New York State. So the polio vaccine, whatever it was mixed in with some food, and these children, without their knowledge or consent, obviously, were given an experimental vaccine. And none of them wound up getting sick, right? I mean, ingestion versus injection. I'm sure KOPROWSKI already knew what the results were going to be. So what? They passed something through their system and they didn't get sick. They're not protected against intramuscular injection, but he could have claimed a victory. However, people were horrified, just the same, that he did that without clearing it with anyone. He just went along and did it. Pissed a lot of people off. And he announced that around 1951, 1952. Salk did not yet have the intramuscular injected polio vaccine done, and it certainly wasn't tested on people yet. So KOPROWSKI's getting a lot of visibility here. Now, why did KOPROWSKI go with the oral route? One of the oldest articles I can find on KOPROWSKI in a U.S. newspaper is shown here, and it was run. There's a 1947 article where after KOPROWSKI comes to the United States, he's working on a rabies vaccine. It's pretty gross. But here's Terre Haute, Indiana. They had an article on April 29th, 1950. Terre Haute scientist wins recognition in developing a new rabies vaccine. And it reads, another honor has come to Dr. Harold Cox, C-O-X, Terre Haute scientist, who is director of the section of viral and rickettsial research, Leader Laboratories Division, American Cyanamide Company, Pearl River, New York. Same place that they said the SV40 eventually came out of, I think. Credit for the development of an entirely new rabies vaccine for dog immunization announced by the Leader Laboratories is given to Dr. Cox and Dr. Hillary KOPROWSKI, assistant director. The vaccine is described by the company as the most important step taken towards the elimination of rabies as a fatal disease since the work done by Pasteur, unquote. It has been tested successfully on more than 12,000 dogs and will be made available to veterinarians and to state sanitary and public health officials throughout the country to aid them in the prevention of rabies in dogs. Now, later on, I'm going to skip a few paragraphs. It says, in speaking of the new vaccine, Dr. Cox said, quote, prior to the development of this new vaccine, the principal means for prevention of rabies in dogs was the use of killed vaccines made from rabies inoculated in the brain and spinal cord of animals. These vaccines were about 80 to 90% efficient, but were effective only for 12 months after manufacture and were not entirely safe for use. All vaccines derived from brain or spinal cord, and this vaccine was made from brain or spinal cord. It's gross. All vaccines derived from brain or spinal cord tissue potentially may cause moderate or severe paralysis in the period immediately following vaccination. This is not due to rabies virus per se, but an immune reaction mechanism which causes the body to produce damage to the central nervous system. In other words, Hillary KOPROWSKI saw evidence that the intramuscular injection of foreign material, now perhaps it had to be, in his case, he was studying spinal material derived from spinal cords or brains, was causing paralysis. Not the virus. It was the paralysis was being caused by an intramuscular injection. In this case, an intramuscular injection of a vaccine. This is a 1950 article, The Rabies Virus Work. KOPROWSKI was starting 1946, 47, 48, 49. So KOPROWSKI knew, because of work done in this rabies vaccine, that intramuscular injection is tough on the body. And it can cause maybe some sort of weird autoimmune disorder. Now, exactly how he would have described the mechanism of action that caused the body to fail and have paralysis, I don't know how well he could have done it. But here he's talking about that. Now, there's another article that I have that was sent to me. It's in a PDF that I don't have open on the screen right now, where it was written by Hillary KOPROWSKI in his later years. It was a 2006 article. And KOPROWSKI talks about his polio vaccine and how up until then all vaccines were administered via scarification or it's like parentetically. I know that's not the right word, but through injection, either intravenously or intramuscularly. I suspect that KOPROWSKI pursued this oral polio vaccine route knowing how tough the intramuscular injection could be. Now, what we don't know is did KOPROWSKI actually think that an oral polio vaccine would protect someone against a polio virus? Did he really think that? Or was he simply trying to find a cheat way, a quick way to get fame and fortune and say, hey, I got it out there first with the worst, even though what they were really trying to do was to develop a new polio vaccine, which is really going to be a platform technology for them to use for more vaccines going forward, which hopefully would not cause child paralysis. That was their goal. It's possible that the fact that KOPROWSKI came out with the oral vaccine was a real monkey wrench for them, no pun intended, given the fact that this stuff is made out of monkey material. Now, also, the whole story of HIV, HIV from monkeys and whatever, that story, or the river story, right? There's a book called The River, involves Hillary KOPROWSKI. And it paints a picture that it was through his lack of testing and the fact that he pushed this vaccine out in large quantities is why we have HIV in the world, or something like that. It sort of paints KOPROWSKI out to be a bad guy. Now, given our understanding of the order of the mechanism of action, I think that's highly unlikely. And I'm not sure KOPROWSKI agreed to be a fall guy of sorts for that. I don't know. KOPROWSKI's background is very complicated. He's generally very celebrated. It's hard to just, roll out the red carpet and trust someone that is on the first-name basis with the Pope. And KOPROWSKI was on the first-name basis with the Vatican popes, multiple of them. That's crazy. Also, Stanley Prusner, Dr. Stanley Prusner, the man who's we just simply call affectionately Mr. Prion. Stanley Prusner's chief lifelong mentor, not his first mentor, in his journey towards talking about prions was KOPROWSKI. KOPROWSKI took Stanley Prusner on in some way. I don't know why, but he did. So the prion stuff also is sort of impacted by Hillary KOPROWSKI. Why is KOPROWSKI not mentioned in here, given the fact that polio is such a big part of the subject matter material? He should have been. He's not even mentioned in the first book. The book that did have the courage to say that polio, paralysis, prior to 1958 was probably being caused by several things, and these other things could have caused it. But the one thing on here that has the best correlation with its rollout and the incidence of infantile paralysis mentioned in U.S. newspapers was the third bullet from the bottom, and this is page 231 of the 2013 printing of Dissolving Illusions, Disease, Vaccines, and the Forgotten History by Suzanne Humphries and Roman Bistranik. And that is, again, I'll read it twice. Provocation of limb paralysis by intramuscular injections of many types, including a variety of vaccines. Doesn't include smallpox. Last time, provocation of limb paralysis by intramuscular injections of many types. Note, she didn't even say intravenous. Intramuscular. And I think this is why Suzanne Humphries now is being promoted heavily. She knows. And she needs to obfuscate and confuse and point fingers at lab leaks and natural viruses and sanitation, all kinds of other things. That's the polio story. Now, there's probably more other little details and nuances, but that's the big story. And when you think about it, it's such a stupid thing to do. It is a dumb idea. I can't emphasize how dumb of an idea it is. A dumb idea from the late 1800s. A dumb idea that started because they just started doing it with animals and they didn't complain much. It was a dumb idea. And just like maybe wood construction is a dumb way to build houses, it's how we know how to build houses right now, so we just keep doing it. Maybe English is the dumbest language out there. But you know what? Most books are written in it right now, and it's good enough. Sometimes good enough is good enough. It would be too much of a disruption to change it. And you know what? Maybe that's what intramuscular injection was. They thought it was working, and it's what they knew how to do, and stubbornly, no one was going to change it. It would be like telling someone, you can't live in a wood-framed house because it never worked. What do you mean? I grew up in a wood-framed house. My granddad, he grew up in a wood-framed house. Yeah, they're not the best. But in this case, wood-framed houses may be stupid. But they're not nearly as stupid as intramuscular injection. Anyways, again, going back to the show, thank you, people, for the support. And thank you for the wishes and for reaching out. And that's my show for tonight. I'm going to go chill out. I got to be up early tomorrow morning. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Take care. Stay positive. Thank you for listening to me, letting me vent and get my mind off things. Take care and God bless.